Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're looking at a huge, rapidly developing international story. We've got an unconfirmed, leaked draft memo outlining a potential ceasefire and maritime agreement between the US and Iran. Okay, let's dive into this because wrapping our heads around this draft is absolutely critical if we want to understand the current state of the global economy, not to mention international security. We're going to stick strictly to what's actually being reported here, piece by piece. To help us make sense of the noise, here's our roadmap. We'll start with the leaked memo itself, then look at unlocking the strait, the massive stakes for the global economy, the key mediators and exclusions, and finally, the shift from maritime to nuclear. All right, part one, the leaked draft memo. Right off the bat, you've got to keep in mind that this information is coming directly from Iranian state television. It's an unconfirmed draft, not a finalized US document. But according to the reporting, here's the core exchange. The US agrees to lift its port blockades and withdraw forces from the vicinity of Iran. And in return, Iran opens up the highly restricted Strait of Hormuz, bringing commercial traffic back to pre-war levels within 1 month. So we're looking at a very specific set of trade-offs designed to ease the immediate, agonizing pressure on both sides. I think Ali Vaiz, the Iran project director for the International Crisis Group, really hit the nail on the head here. He noted that this draft framework is trying to, quote, prioritize the urgent over the important. And that makes sense, right? Both sides are staring down some painful concessions just to fix this immediate, burning maritime crisis before they even try to tackle the deeply important, long-term issues, like Iran's nuclear program. Moving on to part two, unlocking the straits. Now, you might be wondering, with all the massive diplomatic issues on the table between these two nations, why prioritize this specific waterway? Why is maritime access through the Strait of Hormuz literally the centerpiece of this entire framework? Well, this brilliantly illustrates the answer. It all comes down to energy. 20%, that is 1/5 of the entire world's crude oil, flows directly through the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, just think about that for a second. A massive, massive volume of the global energy supply relies entirely on this single geographic bottleneck. If this strait gets closed, the global energy market doesn't just dip, it gets fundamentally disrupted. But contrast that normal, massive volume with the reality on the ground right now. According to recent reports, current traffic through the strait is basically a trickle. We're talking only 24 to 25 ships passing through daily. That is a tiny fraction of the pre-war traffic. It really paints an alarming picture of just how severely global trade is being restricted in the region right now. Which brings us to part three, high stakes for the global economy. Because these restricted shipping lanes, they aren't just abstract supply chain issues. They impact everyday life for all of us. It isn't just crude oil at risk here. This blockade threatens absolutely essential global commodities. We're talking fertilizer, helium, urea, the foundational materials for global agriculture and manufacturing. If those ships can't get through the strait, the whole supply chain just breaks down. And the human stakes, they are incredibly high. Experts are warning that failure to reopen the strait risks a global economic recession, driven by skyrocketing energy prices, but also a massive food security crisis, especially in the global south. Look, a lack of fertilizer means a lack of crops. This abstract maritime standoff could literally cost hundreds of thousands of lives if global food security gets compromised. All right, let's look at part four, key mediators and exclusions. With stakes this incredibly high, you've got a very complex web of players trying to navigate a deal. The ultimate deciders here are the US, specifically Donald Trump, and Iran. Caught in the middle, trying to broker this, are mediators like Pakistan and Oman, plus reportedly figures like JD Vance and Jared Kushner. Meanwhile, impartially reporting what Iranian state TV is saying, US and Israeli warships are still viewed as hostile and would actually remain blocked even if this deal goes through. But as you can imagine, getting all these players to agree is tough, especially when the language in the draft is so vague. Take the word vicinity. The draft calls for the US to withdraw forces from the vicinity of Iran. Okay, what does that actually mean? Plus, the draft suggests Iran and Oman would monitor and control the strait's traffic. And that presents a massive diplomatic hurdle because the US has historically viewed partial Iranian sovereignty over the strait as an absolute red line. Finally, part five, from maritime to nuclear. So we know this proposed MOU is an urgent, temporary fix. But now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast between today's environment and historical diplomacy. Think back to the 2015 nuclear deal. that required immense political will, a somewhat constructive process, and 2.5 years to negotiate. Today, we're looking at the highest levels of mistrust ever, immediately following a war, and on a highly, highly compressed timeline. And that timeline is exactly 60 days. This entire maritime agreement, lifting the blockades, getting those oil and fertilizer shipments moving again, it's ultimately just an off-ramp. It's meant to buy time. According to the draft, it provides a 60-day window of space and stability for the two sides to actually sit down and negotiate the incredibly sticky, complex issue of Iran's nuclear program. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. Can a temporary maritime truce actually bridge the gap to a lasting nuclear deal? I mean, can 60 days of open waterways overcome decades of deeply ingrained mistrust? We've seen the framework, we understand the incredible economic stakes, and we know who the key players are. But as this unconfirmed draft continues to be negotiated, that question remains the ultimate geopolitical puzzle. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on the street.